on this screen we have the taxpayer type, and then the second question is the main source of income for an individual. This dictates the organisation type that comes through to the registration form. The next question is the applicant a resident for tax purposes? And each of these questions feeds the rest of the questions as we go down as well. So we can click yes or no, and that will open the next question and feed through into the registration process as well. Does the applicant's taxable income meet one of the following criteria for VAT registration? So am I an auctioneer, public promoter of public entertainment, or voluntarily registering for VAT? I'm going to go no, which should mean I will not register for VAT. And then the final question for an individual is, can you confirm whether the taxpayer should be registered? When I click yes, you can see it opens up down here the next task options. Before I've done that, they were both grayed out because I can't go on to the next task if I haven't selected an answer to all the questions. If I confirm the taxpayer should be registered and click no, then it says this case will not be closed. It should say this case will be closed when you click next. So closed case now becomes the next task, and if I click save and continue, it will close the case.
I have noted that, Jono.
Thanks, Sharon. So can you confirm the taxpayer should be registered? As I'm doing a walkthrough, it makes sense that I'm going to confirm that I need to register my taxpayer. So I click yes and then save and continue. So now we're at the step of the matching against the staging database. As I said before, in the version I have, there is no staging database to match against. So a search will return an error for me because I can't find the connection for me to search by. But if I searched and it returned a result, then there'd be a list of taxpayers in here that match to the taxpayer these details up here. So TIN, first name, surname, and date of birth. And it would list anyone with a similar details to that. So, and it would be ranked in order of how close to them they are as well. Down here, we have would have a little bit more information about the match on the taxpayer and each single detail that matches on them, so that you can see details where maybe somebody's given you a slightly different first name. For example, maybe I have my birth name in the system, but I've given you Jono. It would show up Jonathan and Jono in here, so you'd be able to see that that those names are similar, and maybe that is actually me because my date of birth is the same as well. Confirming that there's no matches. So if there isn't a match in there, you need to hit the confirm no matches button. If we try to continue without it, it will tell us, please confirm the applicant is not already registered as a taxpayer. If we've selected a taxpayer in here and clicked the little radio button, then it will allow us to carry on without clicking the confirm no matches button. Options at the bottom here, we can request further information or we can reject the registration. So rejecting the registration might be because the taxpayer is actually already registered in the system as opposed to just being in the staging database. Click taxpayer details and continue on to the next step.
And just while you continue on there, John, I think the thing to note is it doesn't stop you registering a duplicate taxpayer if you don't take the necessary action. All it's giving you is finding taxpayers that might be the same person as the one you're looking for, and it's providing you the information to interrogate it. So, you know, there may be a range of reasons it matches. Father and son have the same name and live at the same address but different date of birth. Twins who have similar names with the same date of birth but aren't the same person. It still assumes the tax officer is going to do the thinking work to determine whether the match is genuine or not. So it's not going to stop you proceeding. It assumes that staff members will know what to look for, how to interrogate, contact taxpayers or potential taxpayers to just wash out any potential duplicates in the system. So, yeah, the system doesn't do all the work for you in this space. The officers still need to do some thinking and some investigating themselves.
I can confirm the similar names, same address one, Sharon. So myself and my wife both have 4-letter first names starting with J. Both have date of birth 16 days apart, and same address and same home phone number. So when you put us into the system, we both come out as about a 90% match on each other because of how close our date of births and names are as well. So it definitely shows people with similar details coming up quite high as well.
Yeah.
So the next screen is the taxpayer details screen. We can see here that it has defaulted in the individual and the employed that we selected on the registration eligibility screen. I'm trying to remember the name of the screen there. The commencement date defaults to today's date, and the local office defaults to the office that I am based at. So the registration officer, wherever they are based, that's the local office that it defaults to. If the taxpayer has a different local office that they are supposed to be at, but they've brought the form into head office, you are able to change that to any of the other offices as well. All the options are available there to change that information as well.
Just a couple of things on that. Like, we don't really do anything with taxpayer local office, so it doesn't really matter what you have there. So if a business is in Bartica and that says head office, it actually doesn't matter. I don't think anywhere we use that. We do use where is the officer based, because we store local office against taxpayers, but we also store it against officers. We use it for officers, particularly for cashiers and lodgement officers, but that isn't a critical. That's not a critical piece of information. You might, I suppose, want to run a report saying how many taxpayers have we got registered against this office, because it might help you with resourcing questions. But in terms of RMS, it doesn't direct things anywhere. So it's not a critical piece of information in terms of RMS, directing and tracking cases and things anywhere. So just so that you know that. I was just going to go back to the organizational type before you moved on to Jono, because the organizational type, so the question in my mind or your mind might be, is it critical that, how critical is the organizational type? So if someone's self-employed and it says they're employed, it doesn't make any difference. If someone's employed and the other way around, unemployed, and doesn't make any difference. In fact, in most scenarios, it doesn't make a lot of difference. So if we look at individuals, obviously an estate needs to be, we treat an estate as an individual, and it needs to be an estate. So that's critical, because you can't register for estate tax unless your organizational type is estate. So that's one rule that's critical. For individuals other than that, though, I don't think there's any rules that lock on that. So if you, at the beginning of the year, you register and you're employed by an employer, and then you have some self-employed income, it's not really going to change anything, because your IIT return is generic. So some countries have a different return for business income and a different return for employment income, in which case it might drive off that field. Some countries is someone liable for advanced tax from that field? But for you guys, very little drives off that field for individuals. In fact, I can't think of anything other than the estate one. So it doesn't really matter if ends up over time being a mismatch there. When we do the non-individual, we might look at those ones and see what's critical in that space. But the only one that's critical that I can think of is estate, because the only time you can register for estate tax is if your organizational type is estate. So kind of be relaxed if those ones become out of date, employed, unemployed, self-employed, because people can actually transition through all three of those stages in one tax year. It's really just, again, if you're running reports, it's helpful to know how many people in different states, but it's not critical in driving the tax administration rules in RMS in any way. Unless I've forgotten something, Johnny, that you remember that I haven't, for individuals.
Not in Guyana, no.
Yeah.
There's also a question in chat for you, Sharon. So will there be a way to merge the taxpayer details in the event of a duplication? Man, I'm having trouble with words today.
There's a number of mechanisms for merging taxpayers, yes. So generally my experience, Petra, is that the need to merge taxpayers is quite a messy affair. It's not a matter of just saying merge these two tax accounts, this tin and this tin, because often you've got a mixture of payments in one and returns in another and addresses that overlap, or someone's put returns in both. So generally we don't have an automated process for merging tins, but there is a process for moving, determining which tin is going to be your active one, and then moving payments and returns into the places that you need them to be. So moving them out of the inactive into the active. So we have a number of tools for merging. We've never found that it's logical just to have choose these two tins merged, because inevitably you end up with clashing things occurring. So it's a more detailed, granular approach that you look at the two tins and work out which one's going to be dominant, and then you work out whether you want to move returns, move payments, etc. So that's the process around that. And yes, look, you'll always end up with the potential for some duplicate tins. The idea is to try and eliminate it as much as possible. And you'll see in this workflow that Jono's working through, at the beginning, we try not to get duplicates we try not to re-register taxpayers who are already in the staging database, because we don't want that duplication. And then at the end of this process, for those of you who haven't seen it, there's another opportunity to check that the taxpayer isn't in the RMS database already, and it's done right at the end, just to capture any opportunities that taxpayer has been registered in the same time that you're registering your taxpayer. So we try. There's a couple of opportunities to try and stop it, but inevitably, you're right. I mean, yeah, inevitably there are times when the occasional duplicate can get through, and we try our hardest to stop that happening in a number of ways, and we'll talk about that as we go through. The other, I mean, one of the most common ways things gets duplicated is if there's a really loose understanding and usage of business names, and people get confused between self-employed entity and business name. So that often, in some of our clients, has historically resulted in duplicates occurring, and that's less of a system thing and more of a business process thing, understanding the difference between business names and trading names, etc.
Sharon, you mentioned that the organizational type, it's important that we select the estate for an estate duty.
Yes.
However, if that has not been done and the TIN has been issued, is there somewhere that we can go back and correct that?
Yeah, you can actually. So if you do a change of registration case, you can go back and change that. Now, sometimes it's advisable to do, and sometimes it's not advisable to do. So in the example that you've just given of, it should have been a state, and there's no other reason why it would be problematic. I mean, RMS, I think, does enable you to do even change things from an individual to a non-individual. Some of those things become problematic if you start changing them midway through a registration, and we can a bit later maybe we can talk about what some of those problems are, particularly in relation to return formats and things like that. But in the example that you've given, yes, I think if there's been no transactions and you realize it should have been an estate tax, a state organizational type, that in and of itself is not hugely problematic. What you don't want to do is have an individual who's employed for a couple of years filing returns, and then someone gets confused and changes that to an estate when they die, rather than creating a new tin within a state. So, you know, like there is the potential to do that, but that is not advisable because RMS will kind of enable you to do that if necessary. But once you get started to get specific return types against that tin, you kind of want to avoid doing that. And we can give you some examples of that a bit later when there's problems about that.
So the important field here that catches me out occasionally when I'm registering someone is making sure the commencement date is before the earliest tax type registration date. So for me, it's generally because I'm just not thinking as I'm processing through on this page because I'm working on something later on in the thing. But the commencement date of the taxpayer as a taxpayer must be before the first tax type registration date. So that's just a field there to make sure when you're at this stage that you check against the tax type registration dates to make sure that it actually makes sense lining up with them, and they haven't just entered today's date as well when they actually should have been registered a month ago, which is the example I'm using here, registering someone as at the 5th of October. Going down, we have the names section, which has a taxpayer name and alias. So we can see here as well that the only mandatory fields in taxpayer name is the surname. So the only thing I actually have to enter here is my surname. I'm going to register myself because why not? I'm going to put my first name in there, but I'm also going to put my alias. So everyone knows me as Jono. I go professionally as Jono. Jono is who I am. But officially my name's Jonathan. So that's what is on my identification. So if I was proving who I was, I would have to prove I was Jonathan. Wherever I can, I get them to add that I want to be known as Jono. So that's basically how I would fill my form in that situation. Date of birth. Am I old? Let's go with a fake date of birth because why not? 1990. So you saw that was a mandatory field as well, and then the other mandatory field here is sex. So we have to choose sex, so male. And then here we have the resident for tax section. So this again is fed by the answer on the are they to be registered, the registration eligibility screen. So I ticked yes, they are a resident for tax. So that has completed that here. If I ticked no, they're not a resident for tax, then the country field would be open here for me to select the country that they are a resident for tax within. And the country drop-down has a list of all the countries that there are. And there's the ability to add more if needed in the administration and maintenance screens as well. Primary business nature and secondary business nature are available on the screen as well. So if I was self-employed and had a business nature, I can select that in here if needed. It's also not mandatory, so I don't have to select it because I'm an individual.
No, the only thing that I find a little bit odd on the screen is RMS sometimes does things one way and then sometimes it does things another way. So the secondary business nature here, when we add a document, if you add a document to RMS, you start with add.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But so you add and then you do the next step. But with secondary business nature, you select the secondary business nature. So, I mean, maybe you could, did you show that? If you just show the secondary business, oh. Yeah.
Sorry, that was me accidentally clicking somewhere else.
Yeah, that's all right. So just click any of that. And then you click add to add it to the table that's underneath it. Now, I mean, a lot of times in RMS, you do things around the other way. You start with add, like when you add a case, you start by clicking add and then you do the next bit. For some unintuitive reason, this particular field works in the opposite way. You start with add and then you select your thing.
Yep, you start with selection and then
you select your add. Yep, sorry. So that's just something that, you know, if you're not a regular user of RMS, you probably won't get caught out. But for myself, I always do it around the wrong way because it is the opposite of how it normally works.
Correct.
But no business process stuff there.
Cool. Save and continue. So that will now save that information and continue on to the next step. At any point, if you want to save and go out of the case, say, for example, you've done what you're doing for today on the case and you need to leave, we can just click save, which will save the data on the screen and close to then close out of it and go back to your case management screen as well. The next screen is the contact details screen. So on here we have the address types, phone and email. So only the address is mandatory by standard, but if we select anything else, and also we can choose exactly what addresses we want as well. So we have home, post office box and mailing. We can have a combination of them as well. So if we've selected 2 here, post office box and mailing, it has both of them available here. So we're going to go with a post office box and a home address. Actually, I think I want to look in this list. Yeah, is what I want. So the only field that was mandatory there was sub-district, but that automatically populates the correct district and region here as well. But you can choose from the one that you want to start with. So in this case, I knew that it was Linden Township, and that meant that I was looking in a shorter list than looking through the sub-districts first. So I started there and worked down. And then my PO box is up above that, and I can enter my PO box in there as well. Then if I'm, fine. And then here you can see I've ticked this one is ticked as my primary address for correspondence. So that's where all the letters will be sent for the system, because that's selected as my primary address for mailing. Can change it just by clicking there, and that will put that one in as the primary now, or back and vice versa. If we come down to phone types, we have home, office and cell. If we were entering a phone number, we open it up. Once the phone number is open, then it is mandatory to enter a phone number. So we must enter the number section. We can also enter the area and the extension if required as well. As we carry on, email address, so primary or secondary. And again, once it's opened, it gives a email link. An email must be completed. This does check that it's valid. So you can see at this point, jono@ is not a valid email address, but @dt.com is now a valid email address, as is that. So it allows anything within the rules of current email addresses in the world. So so long as it has at least an @ a dot, and then at least 2 characters after the dot, it's a valid email address according to the current rules of emails. The verification link on the side, so we can send the verification link, which sends an email to that address for them to click and confirm their email address. That will then show up in the system as verified here as well. So that's a process that you can go through to verify that the email address is actually the person who's registering it as well. Nothing on contact details because there's nothing business processy there, Sharon.
No, not really, I don't think. It's just perhaps just go up to the addresses for a minute, Jono. Just sure. So there's been lots and lots of conversations with GRA project team around addresses, and as I understand it, just the 3 drop downs, Jono, I just can't quite see them on the home one or somewhere. As I understand, those sub-district, district and region are not uniformly used in Guyana. So we've tried, with agreement from the project, we've come up with kind of categories to create some formal structure in that space, mainly for the purposes of reporting and business intelligence analysis, and maybe kind of working towards a more uniform Guyana structure, Guyana address structure. So those particular fields would normally be printed on paper-based correspondence to taxpayers, but for GRA purposes, they won't be. I think we're just using, we're just using the first couple of lines of the address. So people would be expected to put in line 1 where it says number 1 main road, and line 2 you might write Linden again, because I think that is, as I understand it, that's what's going to be populated on any correspondence to the taxpayer, not the 3 bottom lines.
Correct.
In the same way, we've had to specifically configure your PO box
address.
Your PO box address, because you just have a universal PO box. You don't have a location like Linden underneath that. So so when you kind of have a play around with training, see and preparing for training, see what the configurations are that you need to get into these addresses so that it prints appropriately on letters. I'm pretty sure off the top of my head it's address line 1 and 2, and Liz, you might know this as well from your involvement in testing, but I think that's what we are translating onto letters for you.
Yeah, that's what I understand as well. So the next screen is additional details. On the additional details, we have a few more fields to complete, and fields that are important to further parts of the section of the other parts further on. So at the top, we have bank account, non-mandatory until we select a bank, and then we must enter something in here now. If we don't enter an account holder or name, or if we don't enter an account holder or number, then it won't allow us to continue once we've selected a bank. But before that, we can carry on without adding a bank number. I'm just adding a number in there for purposes of having a number in there. Legacy system numbers. So this is the ability to add a legacy system number. I believe the TINs are, the numbers can be entered here, and they do come across with the, I'm thinking of migration. I don't know why I can't think of it. So the migration numbers will come across in here as well, listed in here. I believe this list is just a test list that was here so that we can have the field completed without having to have the details coming from the migration database. But it will say the correct systems in here once it's coming through. Right, registration questions in addition to what's been previously asked. So if you have multiple income sources, which is bigger? So this is if you have self-employment, pension or investments, and salary or wages, whichever income is bigger needs to be completed here. So I was employed, so salary and wages goes in here for me. Country of birth. So where were you born? And this is the country drop-down list that I was talking about before, with the large list of countries from around the world listed as expected. There is also the ability to add more in if required through the administration fields as well. This field is not mandatory, so if they were born in Guyana, they don't need to complete this field as well. And date of naturalization is a date drop down, a non-mandatory date drop down as well. Do you import supplies and goods? Yes or no? Ordinary residence. So are you ordinarily a resident in Guyana? Yes or no? Marital status, single, married, separated, divorced. Domicile, yes or no? And are you engaged in any of these specific activities? Oh, hang on. There's more fields down here. So I believe these ones here, Sharon, feed feed information later on.
Yeah, but I think that's a bit of a misnomer because it's an individual, isn't it, Jono?
Yeah, correct. So it
Yeah.
doesn't, I don't think it feeds anything in my individual application.
No, I think it's a bit of a misnomer in the individual return. I think it's more relevant in the corporate, in the company, the company or the non-individual registration, because in the non-individual registration, it feeds the tax rate for the CT return.
Correct. Identification numbers here. So this is a field, like Sharon was saying, where I've got to click the add button first. I can't just click in here and choose one. So here's the add button, which pops up on my other screen. I really should switch those around. So this is one and that's two, but oh well. So identification type, number, issuing country, date of issue and expiry. So the top three fields are mandatory, and then the other two are to be entered if actually there. So I'm going to have given my passport. Number and issuing country, New Zealand. I have a New Zealand passport. Date of issue and expiry, I'm going to leave them blank and save it. And then we can add another number in there if required as well. So if there's multiple IDs that they've provided, you can complete that and add them in as well. And then continuing on to the next field, next screen. Is there anything here for an individual that feeds information later on, Sharon?
Yeah, good question. I was just going to have a look at that. I don't think, so all of this information is customized for GRA, and it's information you currently capture on your registration form. I don't think, and so some of it we just capture at a pure data entry. We store the information in the database, but nothing is being done with it to drive anything in particular. But that doesn't mean it's not available at any stage to drive something. And it becomes particularly useful for two things really in going forward. One is risk type rules. So you might decide, for example, let's just make something up crazy, but you might decide that someone who has salary and wages and is from New Zealand and is single is high risk to you for tax. And you want to find all those people in your database. So we could easily run a rule against the database and find people who match against those three questions 1, 2, and 8. Oh, sorry, 1, 2, and 7. So the information can be used, but at the moment, I don't think anything's being tracked off these questions at all that I am aware of. I don't think there's anything at all. So, but it does create opportunities for you to track things off them. Yeah, that's all. Did you talk about the photo and that signature?
No, I missed them. So the scroll bar on the side catches me out at times. Sometimes I don't realize I haven't gone right to the bottom of this section. I think this is the bottom because I can see this bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a photo and a signature capture here as well. Are they working with an actual signature? So, I mean,
so I think we're going to move into this space. So there is the ability to plug in your computers at registry to a camera and a signature pad, which is it's not dissimilar to probably what you do for your motor vehicle registration. Oh, sorry, your driver's license registrations at the moment. And as I understand, there is a longer term goal to print tin cards, like credit cards, not credit cards, but ID cards, sorry. And again, the photo would be and the signature will be used in that space. At the moment, I don't think this is part of your business process, current business process at all. It's not mandatory at the moment. It's simply sitting here so that you have the capability to do it when and if you want to. So yeah, at this stage, we wouldn't be expecting you to connect them up, but it's not something that our Optimal needs to be involved in. If you connect a camera and a signature pad to your computers, then you're actually able just to import that stuff straight into here anyway. So it's not a problem. It's all set up, ready to go when you want to use it. Yep.
It appears I just took a photo with my laptop camera, which is closed. So okay. I get a nice blank picture there. So
and it's useful for, just general IDing, but also if you move to an ID card for TIN, which I think is the plan.
okay, so the next screen is related contacts. So the screen is used for adding any related contacts to the taxpayer, several relationship types, and there will be a list of the taxpayer's related contacts here, which will appear in their registration as well once we're completed with it. If we click add related contact, another case where we click the add button before we enter anything, I'm just going to make that smaller so that it fits on the screen. So related contact details, we must have a relationship and we must have a commencement date. So going down here, there's several options around this. So administered company, bookkeeper, child, estate. So when you create the estate of a former individual taxpayer, in here you can link the estate back, and it links both ways. So in the estate registration, when you're going through and you select and you do it, it will register that they're the estate of the person in here as well. So this way you get the link of the person's account to their estate showing within the system. Child, father, managed company, mother. So if they manage a company and complete the tax affairs for that company, you can have the managed company here. Organisation owned company, so if they own the company, and if they're in a partnership as well, so partnership at the bottom. Yeah, that's the list there. I will just go into, let's do a child, and so here you can see the information for the child capture. So relationship, if we chose a TIN, that's an individual, right? If we chose a child as their, and chose the child's TIN in here, it actually populates all that information here straight into the related contact details so that it's available for you to use. On the case of child, there's also whether they're biological or not at the bottom as a final question. The commencement date is also needed, which for child is, in the case of biological, the date of birth, but could be the date that they've adopted the child as well. So that is able to be completed in here as well. I've just adopted Mr. Harrison Smith and save that. And so that saves down into here as well so that you can see the relationship is active, and we're able to view that relationship within the once we are viewing the person's registration by opening it up, and that will open that screen back up with the child's related contact details in it as well here. And there's a details of the selected one down here, which shows the basic details of that related contact as well. Sharon, individual related contacts, is there anywhere that this is used through business process or in the later fields in the system? I can't think of anywhere that any of this for an individual is used elsewhere, but you might know something that I've missed.
No, it's more just intelligence gathering, I think. Even to the extent that where an individual is a partner of a partnership, we don't drive allocation of income or anything like that from this screen. We drive it from the partnership return. Again, so a lot of this information, there's no real drive to keep it accurate and up to date unless the taxpayer tells you that something's changed or you find out. So it's not really what I'd call a primary source of information for things like tax calculations. You want it to be accurate, but unless you have a systematic process for ensuring it's up to date, which really you don't. Taxpayers don't really have an obligation to tell you if they're no longer married or divorced or separated. There's no legal obligation. So it can't really be used as a primary source, but it's incredibly useful information to capture nets of people. Like, the marriage ones are, the individual ones are somewhat interesting, but the ones that are really interesting are who are the shareholders and directors of companies, and quickly creating a picture around that, so that when you're choosing someone for audit, you can drill down and see who the associated parties are. The other, sometimes my head blurs, but the other main purpose for this, though, there's one thing that drives off this that's pretty critical, and that is your VAT locations. I'm not sure, John, if you, I was doing a couple of things at once. Not sure if you covered that off, but for purposes of VAT registration, you have to issue certificates for each singular location. So yeah, John, if you can just show that, that'd be great. So let's assume this taxpayer is not an employed person, but a self-employed person, and it might not be in this build, I think, because let's keep going right down I think it's possibly in the next bill, because I think there's an issue raised about it. But you need to issue VAT certificates for every location so that they can display the certificates in each location. But it is still a singular registration. So the way we manage that is adding locations into here. So the related contact for VAT is each of the locations. Liz might have an ice cream shop in 3 or 4 locations, but it's all under her name. So she adds those in as locations and captures the different address for each of them. And then at the end of the registration process, it enables it will facilitate the printing of VAT certificates for each of those locations. The reason we can't see it in here at the moment is because it's only been set up for non-individuals, but we have an issue logged with us that's being fixed, as I recall, to enable it for individuals who have multiple locations as well. So that's probably the most important one in terms of driving something.
Okay, so carrying on, that's the basic process for adding a relationship in there. Each of the forms is slightly different on what information is in there, but they all follow the same basic process. You can enter a tin, and if you enter the tin, it populates the fields. If you don't enter a tin, then you can enter all that details manually as well. So if they've provided information on their wife who is not a registered taxpayer, you're able to add the wife in and the details in without having to worry about whether they're registered or not as well.
Hello,
yeah.
Sorry, John.
That's all right.
Before you go on, just some clarity. With respect to the registration of the estate, can you say when the estate is lodged, if the old tin or the individual tin would be automatically pulled when the estate tin is created, or do we have to search for that tin?
No, so it's a 2-step process, I think. So there's definitely the related context is a key part of that, but the 2-step process is that you need to create the estate tin and link it to the tin of the taxpayer who has just died, and then you need to cease the taxpayer who's just died as well. The reciprocal related contact will turn up on one or the other, depending on which one you set it up in. But yeah, it's a 2-step process. It won't automatically cease the person when they die just by virtue of creating an estate.
So it's not in terms of it ceasing, in terms of it, if the active tin that they had before they die, if it would pull over automatically, or do you have to input the tin?
Oh, you have to input the tin. It won't know who the tin is when you create this estate, because so you basically create a new registration and then link it to the taxpayer who died through the related context.
Okay, so we can go back to selecting tax types again. So the selected tax types here, you can see when I came here, individual tax was automatically selected. So that's because I had selected on the first screen the registration eligibility screen. I'd selected that I was an individual and that I was employed. So it has given me individual tax automatically. At this point, I can then select the other tax types that I might need to register for as well. If I'd selected that I was forced to register for VAT, that would also be selected here as well. I'm going to select individual property tax because we won't be seeing that on the non-individual, and I'm going to select professional fees, and the rest of them will go with on the other, on the non-individual when we get there. So we select the tax types here and then carry on to the next screen where we're going to register the details on each of these tax types. So on this screen, we have a separate tab for each of the tax types we've selected here. You can see in the middle, and the top section is around tax agents and accountants. So for tax agents and accountants, this is where we add their account access. So if they have one tax agent or accountant, we can select here that they have one tax agent or accountant for all their tax types. And this would give that tax agent access to all of their tax types. Alternately, we can set custom access for each tax type, which then means that that drop down showing the accountant tax agent drops into every single tax type tab as well. So in individual property tax, we have it here. In individual tax, moved up the screen, it's here, and same in professional fees, so that we can then choose to have a tax agent on one tax type like this and no tax agent on the other tax types as well. So we can actually do it separately between each separate tax type as well if we need to process it through that way as well. The commencement date at the top has defaulted to the commencement date I chose on the first screen. So this is defaulted to the commencement date of the taxpayer, but can be edited. So professional fees, we're only needing to register from the 5th of November, but individual property tax and individual tax, we need to register from the 5th of October. Let's just start with some of the questions in here. So generally, they all have the return frequency at the top. Annual will be selected for annual ones, and if any of them have multiple frequencies, this is where you can change that. The accounting year end, so if a taxpayer has a different accounting year end to December, that can be selected in here as well. Accountant tax agent, which I've just talked about. If the taxpayer has a different bank account for different tax types, we can select that in here so that that is displayed as well. And the registration documents for, we're on individual property tax, registration documents at the bottom. So if we click add document here, we can add a file that we upload in as well, so that we've got the information about their registration stored on the tax type registration as well. If we go over to individual tax, there is, so this is the other section that will appear on some of the tax types where there's questions that need to be added as well. So the additional registration questions per tax type. So individual tax has eligible for mortgage interest relief, a checkbox which feeds into the their ability to apply for mortgage interest relief, the approval date and the withdrawal date relevant to that, whether they are exempt for advance tax, and their estimated taxable income. So these fields all drive other parts of tax types and that sort of thing as well. So I'm going to be advance tax exempt. I'm not eligible for mortgage interest relief, and I have an estimated taxable income as well. Enough zeros, I don't know how many zeros I just put in. And so these drive other parts of the system later on as well. Do you want to talk about those, Sharon?
Yeah, I can do actually. Let me have a look. So you have I mean, I'll just work through a few of them. You have a process for approving mortgage interest relief. That is separate from your registration process, I think, and separate from your return filing. It's kind of it's separate from your return filing process, although I think it links into the beginning of your return filing process. So this is where where an approval has been given for mortgage interest relief going forward. This is where you update this, and then our Optimal knows that this taxpayer has been approved for mortgage interest relief. So it interacts with that. If someone has got mortgage interest relief in their return, claimed in their return, which is an IIT return, then that will automatically go for review and examination anyway. And so it's as part of that examination process, you can record the details here. AT exempt is a bit of an interesting one. So in the past, we used to run our logic and rules for AT against that organizational type that we talked about earlier. So I think, yeah, so we don't do that anymore because that organizational type, you can't trust it as a primary source of information because, of course, it doesn't get updated until the end of a year, or it may never get updated. So we no longer use that as a primary source for AT. So we do a couple of things for AT now. One is we look at last year's return to determine whether someone should have to pay AT or not. But there are some scenarios, and I actually can't remember what the business scenarios are. You guys might know them clearer than me. When a taxpayer does not have to pay AT throughout the year. And if you select this AT box, then in fact, they won't be, RMS won't, Optimal won't automatically calculate advanced tax for them. It will exempt them from the advanced tax process. Question 5, which is the estimated taxable income, is used to calculate advanced tax, where question 4 hasn't been selected. In the event that a taxpayer is just registered, or if they have registered for more than, if they have registered but they've never filed a return. So perhaps they registered 2 years ago but they have never filed a return. RMS will automatically raise AT assessments or estimates or notices based on that figure. So every year when AT is being generated, what it does is it normally generates off the return that's just been filed. So if I file a return now, it's going to create, based on those figures for this year's return, it's going to create the AT obligation for next year. But in the event that that return's not filed, RMS still has to find a place to, a time and a place to raise those AT assessments. Or liabilities, and this is the field. It'll go back to look for the last income tax return or IIT return, and in the event it doesn't find one, it uses that figure. So that figure is quite important for the generation of AT. If in fact you have some countries have a view that first year of business you don't have to pay any AT. If in fact you ever had a policy around that, then in fact you'd get everyone to estimate their taxable income to 0, because the only point of that field is to generate AT. That's about it really. I'm not just in relation to questions 1 to 3 about mortgage interest relief. Actually, I'm not sure if anything specifically drives off those, other than it's just a record that this taxpayer has been through the process of someone reviewing their claim for mortgage interest relief and it's been approved. And so if they claim again next year, it's fine. They can continue to claim based on that approval. But I don't think anything drives off that specifically in terms of accepting those claims, because we do, all MIR claims go through to examination currently. So I think that because this is all under IIT, isn't it? Yeah, I assume the tax type.
So looking down at the bottom, the next task, there's a grayed out option here, which is payroll branches. So if we had PAYE selected on this taxpayer, payroll branches would now be the next task. But as I'm an employed individual, my next task is just check documentation. So we can carry on to that step. So here is a screen for attaching any registration documents. So ensuring that anything that's required has been uploaded. So these, I believe there's some requirements for some places from some tax types that require documents that would show in here that those need to be uploaded. And then down below is the additional documents. So again, the add button and add the document here as well. So the reference list is a list of what they may be uploading as an additional document. And we can add that in here as well. Any additional comments that need to be added to the documentation forms, and then we can carry on to the department field as well. So on the screen is the recommendation for department. So this goes through the information that's been provided. It checks against the set of rules that the GRA have provided us with around departments, and then recommends a department. So that's where it gives the recommended department here of medium, but it does still give you the ability to put them into the correct department for what they are. If there's something in there that you don't, there's a reason that the taxpayer should be a large, we can change them to a large here as well. But we're going to go with the recommended department and carry on from there. So they will be against the medium department. So here is the other screen that Sharon was talking about to prevent duplication. So this is looking through the current registered taxpayers in Optimal and returning results based on whether they match similar addresses, name, TIN, address, email address, phone number, and something else, date of birth for an individual. So it checks against those 7 things and returns anything that's a match. So you can see here where these are very low matches that are coming back on my email address and my phone number. So I would take a guess that most of these are going to be, something like John in the email address. So jono@dt.com and john@train.com have got some similar letters in them, and then added to that is some similar numbers in the same places in my phone number that I've selected. So it's returned this as a low match. You can see it's just got a 1-star match on it. But you can quickly look if there's somebody here that looks like a much better match, and then you can scroll down and actually check and go, oh, so their phone number, name, date of birth, and something else are all the same. And so that's likely that that's a taxpayer who is actually a match and is a duplicate. So then we can click the registration rejected reason and reject their registration based on that they're a duplicate. So this is the extra step to prevent that duplication appearing into the system as well. Down here is the recommended options. So we're verifying here against each other with a check on it. And then can you confirm no matches? So Jonathan Capewell is not Robinson Corporation. So I'm going to confirm no matches and then continue to the registration decision step as well. So at this point, we're giving a recommendation for the approval or not.
Cool. All right. So what we thought was best to do now is just to get you guys hands-on, because as you kind of work through some scenarios, it'll raise questions in your head that you can ask us, and we can kind of work through those together. Even though Jono's only today gone through the individual configuration fields or configured fields, I think 90% of it is the same for individuals and non-individuals. Some of the business rules obviously are different, and we can pull those up and talk about those as you hit them if you've got questions about them. But it would be a good idea to just get hands-on and start registering some taxpayers. Now, those of you who've been involved in UAT have done some of this. So that's good, but you might have been doing it from a slightly different perspective, just from a test perspective. So today I've just done a really basic approach to creating scenarios. I've got a whole lot of Post-its, electronic Post-its, because we're remote. If we were in country, I would actually use real paper and would put them on the walls. And I'd get everyone to create a scenario of a story about somebody and put it on a Post-it board somewhere. And we don't necessarily create our own scenarios, we create someone else's. So someone else has created a scenario and we pick it up. We're not going through the rigor of having to, follow a registration form, but we are having to follow a bit of a story. So I've created 12 here. You are not obligated to use them, but this is just an example of how you can creatively create scenarios, really. I've created 12 different registration stories. And for you to choose one, maybe if you're physically doing it, you'd take the Post-it yourself, put it on your desk, and that's the one you would follow.